Hi, my name is Ebenezer Safodu. I'm a business strategy consultant and a data specialist. Welcome to my YouTube channel today. I'm so excited to interview Greg Nash today. He's one of Microsoft's MVPs. He's an all-round MVP from data, getting the data through to the end. And I'm so excited to have him on the show today. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Ebenezer. It's great to be here.
Wow. How's Melbourne?
It's good. We're in lockdown right now, but we're hoping to get out soon. So, but overall, I think we're still, we're surviving. We're good.
Wow. All right. So Greg and I would be talking mainly on the user experience and how to improve your report and enrich it to ensure that your users can easily navigate around your report. But before that, Greg, what has been your background and what has been your journey so far with Power BI?
Yeah, so I've been using Power BI since it came out. So July 2015, the first general availability release. I discovered Power Pivot and Excel inside when I was doing operational reporting for IT teams. So my background is organizational enterprise IT. I was a support engineer type person, been doing support and IT help desk and that kind of stuff for a long time. And my responsibility as time went on was more and more around reporting to the CIO and the executive level around what was happening inside the organization. And so I discovered these reporting tools that lived inside Excel because we weren't given any other tools to use. We were an Office 365 shop or a Microsoft shop back then. They didn't have Office 365. And so I learned about Power Pivot a little bit in Excel, and then quickly discovered Power BI Designer and the embedded SharePoint experience that Power BI was doing at that time, learned a lot more about that, saw the future of that. It was really a tool that was kind of built for me. I feel like Power BI, it was almost like Microsoft designed the tool for me because it has a visual aspect, which is sort of an interactive aspect to it and an artistic aspect almost, if you like. But it also has all of the analysis and numbers and all the really great stuff in Excel. And that really kind of fits my personality, if you like. I'm the sort of person that I like doing numbers, but I also am like drawing, and I like art, and I like the concept of visualization of data, and so I like bringing those two worlds together for organizations, and the fact that it makes it accessible for people, and then not to mention things like data engineering, right? So bringing data in, and I think Power Query was really the tool that I was like, this is a game changer for organizations, because if you remember before Power Query, all we could do is like write really complex SQL scripts, or you spend a lot of time wrangling data inside Excel. And so when I saw Power Query and the ability to transform the way that it did that, I was sold. That was it. And so I got into the tool, spent a lot of time learning, obviously in the early stages, and now I've been consulting and running my company, D. Watson Consulting, for the last 6 years, helping people figure out Power BI.
Wow. That's great. That's some great background. I mean, it's similar to most users because it's very hard for you to get any tool today that does the end-to-end data architecture. Because most tools either is doing the transformation bit, the data shaping or data profiling bit, or is getting the data, or is doing modeling. But to get a 360 tool that is good at every part of the data journey is superb. And it's so easy on any organization and any person that wants to actually use Power BI, especially with the improvements in the last end, which is the visualizations. It's pretty much made it very easy for you to just be in one tool and get all that you need. It's pretty amazing. Yeah. So, I mean, with this background, let's go to, I want to design a Power BI report or a dashboard. What are the things that I have to consider? I mean, from the design perspective.
Yeah, so it's funny. I think this is an area that I'm seeing a lot of movement in the way people are approaching Power BI and the way that people approach their design of Power BI reports, right? And the reason why I say that is because I think you kind of fall into two camps in the Power BI world. You're either a data person and you really like DAX and modeling, or you're a visual person and you really like maps and creating interactive visuals, right? And you see, like even in the MVP community, we see people who specialize in DAX and people who specialize in visuals. And but often the DAX people are they focus less on visuals, and the visual people, they focus less on the DAX side, right? And so
Yeah.
so you've got to as a Power BI person, you almost wear 4 or 5 different hats. You know, you've got thinking about the data engineering, right? So, and even DAX and data engineering are 2 separate things, right? So Power Query and the movement of data out of that, but even before that, maybe APIs associated with your line of business systems, right? That can be quite complex and be programmatical. So you're wearing a programmer's hat, and then you're wearing a Power Query hat, and then you're wearing a data modeling hat, and then you're wearing a DAX hat, and then you're wearing a data visualization hat, and then you're thinking about the interactions, which is not necessarily the same as the visuals as well. So it's not just UI design. And I think when people talk about Power BI user experience, they often just say, well, we'll just redesign the page, but it's not just about the user interface. It's about, because Power BI is an interactive tool, you have to think about the order in which we present information to our users and the interactions of how many clicks does it take to get to insight. So fundamentally, as an idea, user experience is always about the user, hence user experience, right? So the first question that we ask ourselves when we get into user experience is, who is the user? Okay, and so who are the people that I'm building this report for? And you need to have a very good understanding of the context in which that person is going to consume your report. So if your end user, let's say, is a rail worker who is out there looking at engineering reporting on the railway. Now that person could be sitting at a desktop computer, or they could be standing on a train track with an iPad. And the context in which that they consume that report is very different in those 2 scenarios. And so each user cohort, or each person who consumes your reporting, will be consuming that reporting in a very different context. So the first question is, who are the users, and how will they be consuming this reporting, and what are the most important insights to be showing them at that time when they're consuming this reporting? So that's that's the most important first question to start when it comes to user experience.
That's a very great insight. That who is your user? You need to identify the users of your report or your dashboard and know the context in which they are going to use the report. And then you look at what insights can you give the user and the context, which matches the user and both the context. That's pretty much a great insight. Wow. So we look at our user, we look at our context, and then the questions we need to answer for the user and the context in which it will be used. All right. So after that, what next? What do we need to consider?
So then hopefully we've got a good picture of our user experience, like what our users are trying to achieve, and specifically what are the business questions we're trying to answer and what's important. So it's about prioritization of insight, right? So our job as Power BI people is delivering insight. We're insight delivery people, right? We take data, we mess around with it, and then we deliver insight for the business to be able to make decisions. So if I will use the railway worker example, what's the thing that they need that's most important when they're standing there on the track? It might be, is there a train currently on the track? Might be a really good piece of information that that person needs to see. And where is the fault, or what is the issue that person might be out there in the field looking at? So that's in terms of the context. Now, somebody who's maybe the manager of those railway workers, they might be more interested in you know, how many people showed up late, and when did the, and how many issues have we solved this week? And so they have a different context and a different idea. And so the same data could be exactly the same data, but you have different prioritizations depending on the context. So you're prioritizing the business questions, and you're building a portfolio of what questions we're trying to answer and what's the most important piece of information. Ultimately, when it comes to visualization of data, understanding the priority of that data, the visual priority of data is really, really important. So there's going to be, not every piece of information is equal. And so when we show an Excel spreadsheet to somebody, then every cell is the same size and every number is the same size, right? And so this is what the sort of the history we come from. Usually as a reporting people is that we like to give people a table of data and say, all of your information's in there, which is true, but it's not true in the context of, it's not prioritized easily so that they can consume it. Wow. So user experience is really about what's happening in the brains of people as they're consuming our reports.
Wow. So basically what you're saying is that put the user in mind right from start to finish, that what is the user going to do by consuming this report at the end of the day? What kind of insights, what action are they going to take after consuming this report? And that should determine what you put in, as well as even how you design the report, I guess.
Absolutely. And so what we see when, and we've done this many, many times, we've refined this approach over a long time. We see that if you don't do this, if you fail to understand the user of the report, everybody who's ever built a Power BI report knows what happens. You build the report and you show it to somebody, and then they make changes, and then you go back and you try and fix it, and then they change it again, and then they change it again, and then they change, and you end up in what we call rework, you know, like you're constantly reworking the report to try and manipulate the data model that you have into the user experience you're trying to create, you know. And so you've got this, and that happens after the fact, and sometimes you have to go back and redo all of the queries or something because you didn't realize, oh, he's standing on a train track, I can't give him all of the data, it takes too long to refresh, I can only give him 3 queries because we need it to happen instantly. You know, little things around that context could affect right back from the start how much data you bring in the first place. So it's very, very important to do that to avoid that rework loop.
Wow.
So then when we've got our context and our priority, and we understand the users, and we could have a good understanding of what business questions we're trying to ask, then we're into the practical elements of our building the report. And I'll go through those fairly quickly, because the next time user experience becomes important is towards the end of this, where you're now building the UI, right? Yeah. So the next pieces are going to be around engineering the data, getting data out. Is it data quality, security, all of the things associated with getting information out of your source systems, bringing that into a central location where you can access it easily for Power BI purposes, building your Power Queries, manipulating the data so that it's optimized for analysis and also optimized for the report you're trying to build, modeling that data and building that star schema, as I'm sure you've spoken to many people about, and then creating those DAX calculations, right? So you doing a bunch of calculations to that meet the needs, and hopefully you've got a good idea of what you're trying to do because you've got that good business context in terms of what you're trying to achieve, and then you're in data visualization and creating the interactive experience, which is kind of the next phase of user experience, if you like.
So, I mean, what you're saying is very true. Recently, I was teaching a class, and they were asking, why do we have to waste time going through the questions, going through all these iterations? And I told them that if you do not, like you just said, if you do not set the right premise for your reports, you're going to do a lot of reworks. If your model is not correct, if your transformation is not done appropriately, you would have to always go back to transform data. Maybe there are fields that you need that you did not look at. There were some particular columns you needed to unpivot to make sure that you can use them as slices in your report. If you don't do all that well, you would always have a challenge when it comes to the final test of actually answering, because as analysts or as Power BI developers, the end game is to solve a problem or the which action we need to take. So you need to make sure that you go through all that step before you get to the UI, which is what we'll be focusing on. So now I've gone through the right steps. I've got through the consider the user, ask the right questions. I've prioritized. I'm now about to make sure that I open my report page 1. What do I do practically?
Cool. Yeah. So maybe I'll why don't we go through a bit of a simple example where we'll build a simple. This is a report that I designed and built with Alice, another MVP of ours for my content. And so there's a full hour of us building this report, but I'll take you through sort of the basic steps that we went through, because there's a couple of things in terms of setting that context that I think is really important. So all the heavy lifting for user experience happens up front. And so I want to kind of demonstrate that a little bit.
Oh, very great.
So we always start with a whiteboard, right? We want to try and whiteboard out our what we're trying to do. So in this example, let me quickly
find. What tool are you using?
This is OneNote. So this is Microsoft OneNote. Yeah, so most people who have Power BI will have this because it's part of the Office 365 suite, and it's great for drawing with your mouse. I like doing mouse drawings with my OneNote. Okay, and so we can so in those early stages where we're defining those end users, we might have a few different end users, and we need to think about, okay, what are the different so they'll each have different questions, and so you'll be answering different questions, and then those questions will result in different maybe pages on your report. So if this person has 3 questions, you're probably going to have 3 pages on your report. Well, you need to answer those questions on your report page for that person, if that makes sense. So you're really looking to sketch out, and I spend a lot of time doing these types of sketches, what we're trying to answer on a page. So in the example with Alice, we were looking at water flow data, okay? And so she was like, okay, I've got this water flow data. It tells me how water is flowing through the through different rivers in Victoria, here in Victoria in Australia. And so I said, oh, well, that'd be good. So that sounds like the sort of data, we should put it on a map, So I drew a little map like this, and I said, so we'll have dots on the map, and then it'll be, here's the rivers, and then each of the rivers will have dots on them. She's like, yeah, that sounds good. And then when we click on a dot, we'll be able to see more information for that particular location. So because Alice and I both have quite a bit of experience, we know we want to do a map, we know what the interaction will be. So you have to have a good understanding of how visuals will react. And so this is a good way because it presents all of the information at once to the user. And so there's lots of great books on presenting information in context for people, and probably the main person that I really like, his name's Tufte, Tufte, and so he's the professor emeritus at, I think, Princeton. And his books are fantastic for this, for thinking about ways to present data. And he talks about that information relevance and making relevant information front of mind. And because the most relevant information is where are these located, we made this the biggest piece of information on the screen. So the second piece of information we wanted to see was how much water is flowing through each one. That was a question. And so we had our list of our questions, how much water, and which location is in drought, during the time period. And so we're writing these questions down. So we write a series of questions down that to help us with our design. Now, we haven't touched Power BI, right? We haven't thought about Power BI at all. We haven't touched any data. We've done a little bit of data work. We have a good idea of what information is contained in the data, but we haven't really touched the tool yet. So we did that, and then Alice said to me, well, these people are engineers and they love tables. So you have to have a table as well. You can't present them. They need to be able to see the table underneath. So I said, okay, well, let's give them a table as well. And so we had a table, right? So we had this one was going to be like a graph that showed, the flow of data, the flow of information. And so we had And so this sketching, this ideation of ideas is very, very important in the Power BI world to be able to throw out ideas with a group of people who understand the context and the business, and without having to go through the whole rigmarole of building a full Power BI report before you can do this step. So it's about failing fast, you know, like if this is wrong, we want people to be able to visualize this, and your users don't know what they don't know. And so we want to be able to have that process in place. So we did exactly this process. We spoke about the data, we spoke about the context in which we wanted to consume the data and who it was that's going to consume the data. And then we did a sketch of what we're going to do. And so then that sketch turned into a Power BI report. So we go through the process then of building out a Power BI report using this information. And so I'll bring up the Power BI report in a second, but you can clearly see that all of the thought around interaction and which pages, which and information relevance, you need to do that as part of your sketching or part of the earlier stages, because if we decide that this is a really important piece of information, we need to think about the data engineering associated with that graph. And so we ended up building a report. It looks like this. And as you can see, it looks exactly, it has the same elements as my sketch, right? And so I'll just discard those changes. And so here we've got a map. This is Australia. So here we are in Australia. This is our area down here in Melbourne.
The icon map.
This is icon map, Alice's favorite favorite map. So
I knew it, Alice.
yeah, Alice loves this map, and so she's right too, because it's great. So we did the little droplets, and then we spoke about, and then as you said, you know, like we created this slicer because we wanted to see if it was a dry year or a wet year. And then I can click on an individual gauge to see if that was, so this is a wet year in 1981, it was a wet year compared to the average. And so this is our average line at the top. So we're able to answer the fundamental business questions that we created by sketching out the solution first, having a bit of an idea, and then worrying about the Power BI end of the speed. And you can see some of the top tips for creating Power BI solutions, I would say, is always have your business question on the page somewhere that you can read and that reminds you what you're trying to do on that page. That's very, very important. And then it's about information relevance, right? So what's the most important piece of information on the page, and is it obvious? You know, is it obvious to me as a user of the page? So really the most important piece of information on the page is actually this graph. And so that shows us if it's a wet or dry year, which is kind of what we're trying to show in this report. And so it shows off. Now we could improve this because there's still a few user experience things that we could add to improve the information relevance of this. Because like I can't see a single number here, right? It's difficult for me to know, how do I know that this is wetter than 1982, for example? This is obviously a dry year because you can see it's below the line. Now I know that because I can explain it to you, but you don't know that by glancing at this report. So there's improvements we could make here to show, even if it was just a word, wet or dry or 20% below, you know, normal or something like that, ways that we can improve visualizations by understanding that if this is the most important thing on the screen, then it should be bigger. And it should stand out more, you know. So we use size. So there's all these tools, the tools of graphic designers that we can use to improve the information relevance of particular items. So for example, if that graph was the most important thing, then I might make this slightly smaller, and I might make this. Now there's an order of operations in terms of the way people consume information. You can see I've got my report questions underneath here. Hiding, right? This is the ones that we created. So if this is the most important piece of information, then typically we use what's called like a Z pattern. So the top left-hand corner of the report is the place where people consume information first, mostly. Now this is cultural as well. So if we're this is in my culture, we read left to right, right? Because we read English. Yeah. And so in left to right reading cultures, you will find that the top left corner is the place where people want to have their most important information. Now, in other cultures, it might be right to left, and that means you need to think about the different cultures associated. So there's lots to consider in terms of that kind of stuff. But you use size to show relevance, right? Because this isn't the most relevant, then you would make it the biggest. So the other way that you can show relevance, and you can see just by making small changes to the report layout, that this now is the first, if you sort of go off and come back on this report, if I take it away and then bring it back again, the first thing you notice is the graph. Yeah. Okay. And so that's the idea, is what's drawing the eye and what's not. And so this is what we use conditional formatting for in these tables as well. And you use it to highlight, and I think we've got some conditional formatting in some of these tables if I find a particularly bad year. So you can see I've highlighted this one over here. So it draws your eye because it's highlighted. So that's another way, which is using contrast and color to draw the eye to a particular area of the report. So we can use size, contrast, color, location, proximity. All of these are tools that we use as UI designers to present the most relevant information up front, and then the least relevant information gets pushed away. And so this is what we're trying to do. And you can see that we do this. This happens naturally in some areas of Power BI. In fact, Power BI themselves do it inside their own UI. And so you see they use different ways of presenting things. So let's say if I hide a column, the first thing that happens when we hide a column inside the UI, or if we hide things, I have to view hidden, don't I? Otherwise I can't see it. Is that you notice it goes grey and it like falls off to the background, like when things are disabled. So they're using contrast and color and size to themselves inside the Power BI UI to bring things to bring relevant information forward and push irrelevant information back. And so that's why you get this bold effect in the top row of your tables. And then these are not bold, right? So your eye is drawn to the top row because it's bolder. So that's the use of contrast to create information relevance. Similarly for the selector up here, well, I know which one's selected because it's high contrast. And then, and so that draws your eye away because these are lower contrast, that draws your eye away. So using those tricks, and we can apply things. So the thing about here, proximity, have you noticed here that to be able to tell what number that is, I either have to mouse over to work out it's 846, or I have to draw an invisible line with my brain from 500 and then try and work out. Yeah, and so a simple way to if this is the most important piece of information, we want to make that obvious. So I want to add data labels to the top of this one and then remove the y-axis because that's no longer relevant. So theoretically speaking, and maybe that's too many data labels, so that's a bit busy. So let's remove the label density down, and so only relevant information starts to appear. So this is different, very small, subtle changes to the look and feel of your Power BI report can make a big difference to information relevance. So this layout is completely different to the original layout. In the original layout, the map was kind of the biggest thing on the page. Now the graph is the biggest thing on the page. And it might not be that the graph's the most important thing. Maybe the map is, or maybe the table is. And if the table is, then maybe we should make that bigger and increase the size of the thing. So you've got all these different, very subtle considerations around user experience, user interface, that you need to know the information relevance. So you need to understand the user to be able to make adjustments in that area. And so that's really, when it comes to the user interface, that's just building one page. And then there's the presentation of data. And so irrelevant information should be pushed out of the screen. So if this wasn't relevant at the time that I'm looking at this graph, personally, I would probably get rid of this table altogether, have just these two like this or something similar, or maybe something with like a big overall number down here. And then when I then create a drill through page with the table on it. Okay, and so here's our table. And then we might drill through from using our streamflow gauge ID, for example, and our date. And that's about presenting only relevant information at the time that it's needed. So if this isn't the most important, let's keep it important. And then I'm looking at 1981, and then I want to right click, drill through to page 2. I want to see the table. Now that I've got the initial information, drill through and see the table, which has less relevant information, but so we've added a click. So we've added resistance to this, right? We've added one click to be able to get to this information, which says to me as the report designer that this is less important. It's still important enough to put on the report, but we are taking it off the front screen because it's not important enough at the time.
Right. What would you talk about the fact that people would say for drill throughs, for non-users of Power BI, how would they know that there's a drill through feature that has been enabled?
Yeah, so they've done a bit of work to try and make it more discoverable in terms of drill through. It's funny how this map resets. I'm not sure why it does that. So see, there's that information. As I mouse over, it says right click to drill through. That's one. That's a clue that there's a drill through for that thing, and it'll happen here as well if I drill through is not enabled here because I didn't add the I didn't use average stream flow, and so it's only enabled for that area. And so that's one way. But there's also a concept of a drill through button you can create. So if this is not discoverable enough for you, and discoverability is a very big piece of information relevance and design. So you want to, if that's a really important feature that you want to ensure people know about, then we want to insert a button that maybe like a drill through button that is really obvious that you can click and drill through. And so there's now there's an action inside buttons now, which is a drill through. And so now you can add a drill through action to a button instead of people having to right click on the information and do it, which means it'll pass through all the current filters you've got selected. And so I think we can quickly create one and see what happens. Drill. And so if I'll add the action, sorry, let me put an action in, destinations page 2. And so if I click on something that enables the drill button, so I can now drill through because this button's been enabled, and then I can click on the button and it takes me through using the same drill context. So that makes it more discoverable for people to see if it's able to be drilled through. And so that's a design choice that you can make as a creator, depending on whether you want to make it very obvious that there's a drill through, or you're only doing it for the special advanced users or something, and maybe they're okay with the right-click drill through experience. And so there's a few tricks like that you can use to create extra capability inside your report without having to sort of rebuild it or whatever. In terms of, yep.
Yeah, so continue.
Yeah, cool. So in terms of other user experience pieces that you need to consider is obviously the way that you use slicers is very, very important. And you can see that this is a horizontal slicer. So I quite like a horizontal slicer for years. I quite like the user experience with this. It's the same as a regular slicer. It's just set to list, and then we go here and we set our general orientation to horizontal, and it creates this responsive slicer. This is a nice way to present years and months. I prefer it to this one, which I think is a little bit janky to use for people, but some people like this one. This one's quite flexible. It's got a lot of different capabilities, but sometimes so this is the difference, right? Is that here to select a year, I either have to go in here and then select 1975 and go here, or I have to drag this, and it takes a lot of precision. It's a high precision move to get it to the first of a year. for example, whereas here I just click on the year. And so how many clicks does it take for your users to achieve the outcome they're trying to get out of your report? That can make a big difference. And that's exactly the same tool presented in two different ways to make it easier for somebody to select a whole year. And so, yeah, to select a whole year here, I would either have to drag to the 1st of the 1st, or I'd have to go here and select 1980 and then select the 1st of January and then go here and select 1980. And so I can't even get to 1980, you know, like there's lots of clicks involved in getting just that 1 year. And so maybe you just want to make things a bit easier for people. Yeah, and so that's really the fundamentals of the user, understanding the user. Then the rest of the tools are all around using user interface tools and graphic design tricks to be able to present information that is relevant in the place that it needs to be, and then understanding the different interactions that Power BI has within itself, you know, and so the interactions between these two visuals, for example, and you need to, you know, maybe turn on interactions if you want it to present information in a particular way. When I click on here, do we want it to filter over there? If I click here, do I want it to filter here? Do I want it to cross filter or cross highlight? Do I want it to filter? Those interactions are really important. And then the pages and the information and the order in which we present information on each page. That's the other kind of consideration. And then you might use bookmarks or other things to optimize that, you know, to make it a one-click experience for people to get to a particular context, which is then, again, you would use a button or something like that to move people around your report in a natural, in a way that makes sense based on what they're trying to do.
All right. For instance, in the use of slices, what's your rule of thumb? Should we use more slices in our report, or as much as possible limit the use of slices so that you could improve the user experience in terms of navigation?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and the answer, as always, is it depends on the user, right? So it depends on how we're trying to present information to the user. So for this kind of report, we wanted to give a very obvious way to select the different year. You know, that was kind of the first consideration, is because we're talking about years, and so years are an important. So we create a slicer that's on the page for that. So if you've got a filter that perhaps is important but not so important, you want the users to interact with it very often. This is often when you have defaults, you know, like you have a default. Say you don't have any data before 1975, or you never want this to show blank, for example, the year is blank. So I would add that kind of filter here. And so I would remove my blank here because it doesn't add any value. And then if I don't want the user to interact with it at all, I might lock that filter so that it's the report. It's a report. The owner of the report has set the filter rather than the user can interact with the filter. And so this is where I set default filters and things like that. Sometimes some users do like having this filter experience, but they can put it away on the side of the pane, because when we publish our report, that filter pane will still appear. And so you could add, if I wanted to give maybe the users the ability to filter, but it's not very important in the context of this, but you know, sometimes they do want to, maybe they want to filter by name, for example. I might add that in here, and leave it unlocked. And then when the user comes along, you know, we publish a report like this. Sorry about this. Oh, I should discard these changes, shouldn't I? That way it won't come back up. When the user comes along, they have the opportunity to filter things for themselves, which I added it to that. I added it to here, didn't I? Yeah. So you put page level filters, for example. Let's put it on a page. So then maybe they want to come in and go, oh, I'm only interested in Little River and Lee River and Kangaroo Creek, for example. That's another. So you think of that, but then the user can put those filters away and then they're looking. Now, interestingly, with that kind of filter, I've applied a filter to the page, but there's nothing to tell me that I filtered the page. Okay, so the users will often confuse themselves, right? And so you have to think about the context of the user again. If we have filters like this, do we need to add a piece of information on the page that tells us that we filtered to these 3 creeks or to these different years. And so, and you might use a measure that, you know, concatenates your filters together or something to display that information. So so the combination of visualization and words, you know, actual words to enrich the user experience.
So what about slices also? I mean, should we put so many slices on our page?
I think slices is you want to have all of the very important, the most important user interaction slices. Yes, you potentially put them on your page, but I tend to you only want to give people 1 or 2 interactions, right? Because slices, it's easy to get confused. If you select 3 or 4 different slices, you can set it to blank. You know, like if I select only 2018 and then I've got 1981 selected, I get no data, right? And that's because I have to know that I've got 1981 selected up here and I've got the slicer down here selecting a different period. So you can create, if you're going to have slices on the page, you need to ensure that they complement each other. They don't act in competition with each other, because you can create a user experience where people get no information.
That's interesting. All right. So you talked about the questions and the answers, but how do I organize my flow of story? Imagine if I have 3 or 4 questions, how do I organize the flow to ensure that, okay, a question per page, what do I create? Do I use buttons? How do I design it so that there's a flow to the user in terms of his experience to the dashboard?
Yeah, so data storytelling is a big part of Power BI, and obviously the tools for that are going to be usually your bookmarks. And so in terms of designing your data stories, you're going to start with those sorts of the questions you're trying to answer, right? I've hidden the questions. Where are they? Here they are. So here are our report questions. How does the stream flow change over time? Does climate change affect our stream flows? What were the highs and lows of the stream flow? How many days were the rivers dry, and how many days of the location with the stream flow? Like, this was the original questions that we're starting, we want to answer where we're designing this report. And we've only designed 1 page, and hopefully we'll design more. But so I think a good rule of thumb is first take all your report questions and create a page for each one, you know, and insert a text box and paste your question at the top. How is stream flow changing over time? Okay, and so I don't know how I managed to do that, but there we go. That would be the title of this page. Now, this might not need a lot of graphs, right? You might not need a lot of information here. So this is where you might want to add text and visuals in a combination to explain this to people. And this is where you can use smart narratives and those text-based visualizations that are really useful in this situation. So so that's the first thing, and then it's about the order in which you want to answer those questions as part of your presentation. So, you know, you can think about Power BI as a data storytelling, like a PowerPoint for data, right? You're creating almost like these PowerPoints. So you might want to reuse our this graph in a few different areas to show different contexts, right? So in that case, if you're building a story flow, maybe you're using bookmarks to swap between different pages, but then also swapping between different contexts. So you might create something that says, you know, and we'll just quickly replace this and you can add dynamic measures in here. There was a particularly wet week, which had 331 stream flow, or, you know, X locations. So you're starting to add some words around what's going on. Now, then when somebody, that might be bookmark number 1. So we insert a bookmark number 1. And then we create a second bookmark that has a different one that maybe is, 1990. And then we say in 1990, let's find a dry. Let's talk about the drought here in Australia. So there was a big drought in the 90s, right? And so everything's dry, okay? And so then we change this box. I'll just get rid of this drill button. We should have 2 of these, yep. In 1999, or it was like week 52, '84. Okay, so let's insert some bookmarks. So we'll have a look at our bookmark locations. And so we'll add a bookmark for this one, which shows our 1999. And then we'll go back to 1981. And then I might use my selection pane to hide the top text box. And so now we'll create another bookmark. Okay, so what should happen now is that as we click between bookmarks, I think I moved that around, did I? There we go. So as we click between bookmarks, we get 2 different, so we're telling, it's the same information, but we're presenting 2 different views of that information with a little bit of extra words around what we're doing. So we're kind of telling a story. Okay, in 1981, there was particularly wet or whatever, and then in 1999 it was particularly dry. And so that might be our presentation of our data. So we're using the same page, but we're changing the context of the page to tell the story of the data. And so if when we're so this is much less about what I need is average stream flow over all years by year. That's how a lot of people talk about reports. They speak about them in terms of like, we need to show our average over time, or we need to show our total sales last year versus our costs. But the questions that we want to be asking our users is, what is the story you're trying to tell? Are you looking at that because costs are too high? And if that's the case, how do we show the costs are too high compared to 3 years ago? And then let's create a visualization that allows people to compare those things. And then you get a much more focused report that achieves what you're trying to do. And then people are happy with it, because that'll be the internal, everybody who asks you to build a report has a little internal dialogue of what they're actually trying to do, and so there's always that consideration when it comes to that user experience is always going to come back to what's happening inside the person's brain when they ask you for the report, and also while they're using the report, what are they trying to look for? A great way to test your reports is to put them in front of somebody and then say to you, Ebenezer, tell me what was our stream flow in 1983? You give them a challenge and then see if they can figure out how to do that. Now, if they can't, you've got a user experience problem, right? Because they don't know, it's not obvious to them how to do the thing that you've asked them to do. And so you're not answering those basic business questions.
I think that's a very insightful technique to assess how useful your report is in terms of the user experience, that you ask a question and see maybe by how many clicks the person would have to do to get the very answer that they are looking for, especially knowing the business problem. With the bookmarks that you created, would that mean that you create a button with 2 cases of 1981 and 1999, or wet and dry season?
Yeah, you could do it that way. You could create 2 different buttons, like what were the wet seasons, what were the dry seasons, for example. Or you could just use Power BI and this is a trick that Matt Allington does often, is that he uses Power BI in presentation mode. So see how we've got bookmark down the bottom, 1 of 2, and I can click the back arrow, right arrow here. This is like PowerPoint, Power BI PowerPoint, and you can actually put that on an iPad and do it, and then use interactions that way with bookmarks as a presentation of the data. So this is usually, I would say, bookmarks are mostly for when you're building for a presentation of the information, and you want to save each of those contexts so that you don't have to click 20 things to get it set up so that you can talk. You can just click one button and it shows you the information as you wanted it to be set up, and then you can talk to that piece of information. And so so this is a good way to quickly set up your presentation of the information through bookmarks. But yeah, you could have it as a button on the screen if you wanted it for people to interact with, or you could just use it in presentation mode if it's just yourself presenting the data.
How did you do that? Can you go over that, the presentation mode?
Yeah. So if you go to bookmarks and see it says exit, if I hit view, this view button here in bookmarks, that puts you in presentation mode down the bottom. And then you have the ability to just use your right arrows to juggle between your bookmarks. Yeah. And it'll have the name of the bookmark here, so you know what you're up to. And so, yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's pretty useful for end users. I was going to ask a question on, in such a scenario, if you could put in a call out also, and then by clicking on a particular button or a particular, a button, you could then call out the explanations that you want to give.
Like yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think with shapes and things, it's getting, you know, a little bit easier to create call outs and things. So we can potentially maybe you have a call out that only appears when we click on one of the bookmarks.
Exactly.
And so we'll just hide it for now, and then click on bookmark 1, and then we hide it for bookmark 2. Okay. Oh no, we'll hide it for bookmark 1. Bookmark 1, hide, and update. So we should get, yeah. So you can have different visuals appearing and disappearing on top of your other visuals as well.
Just to tell the story.
Mm.
All right. Okay. I think you've answered one question on how to arrange, but I mean, if you're going to answer each question on each page, how would you handle the home page in this case? What will be your default or your principles that you access to do? If I come to the home page, what's the best way to navigate so that, because you do that a lot with Alice and the team and other works you've done with. So with such questions being answered across board, how should my homepage look like so that for storytelling wise, as well as the user interface, user experience wise, what could I do in the homepage?
Yeah, so there's different ways to handle this kind of stuff. I think for this, we're talking about, like, if we have a really clear idea of the priority of the information we're trying to give to people and the order in which that information needs to be presented to them, then the homepage is going to be the answer to the first piece, right? So it's going to be, you don't want to give them the choice to move into something else unless that's important to them, you know? And so typically you want to start with, usually it's a broader view. So you start with a broad view, and we see this in the dashboard in a day training pack, right? Is that they start with that broad marketing view. I'll bring it up so people can see what it looks like. But you usually start with a high level view, and then you drill into a lower level data view. And so let's have a look at this one. So again, you're probably looking at a higher level view with everything to begin with, and then maybe you're drilling into, okay, what happened in this particular week, and maybe you're showing all the days of that week or whatever to to drill to the next piece of information, or you've got buttons or you've got bookmarks to take you there. So yeah, in terms of home pages, you could create like a home page that had, you know, the different categories. I think that kind of, you typically would roll that up maybe up to a dashboard or maybe into an app rather than into the report itself. I like to keep my reports small and very specific to their purpose. And rather than I think a mistake that people try to do is they try to put the answer to every possible question in their report as their report pages, where I think if you keep your report small and focused, that means you can have small and focused data sets, which is really where that you run into trouble, right? Is where you try to create a data set and it's got 20 million tables in it and there's 20 million rows in every table, and then your data set runs really slow and you get a bad user experience. So something we haven't really spoken about in terms of user experience is data timing, right? And the frequency of update, and that can be play a really big part into the what information you can and can't present. And so there is data engineering considerations around that, which is why you need to have that conversation up front. But a key piece of your user experience conversations with users, you need to include your data engineers. If your data engineers are separate to the person building the report, they have to be involved in those early conversations, because they're the people who give you access to those pieces of information, and they need to think about how often and how much data do we need to suit this particular need. And I think people think that it's often people will go, well, we'll just bring all the data in and then we can answer every possible question. And anybody who's run into a very large Power BI desktop data model knows that usually that ends in really, really slow DAX, long-winded. All the reports spin their wheels while they're trying to process all of this data, and no one uses it. Like, they're using only a fraction of the data that they need. And so keep your reports very, very lean. You bring only the minimum amount of data in to answer the specific business question you're trying to answer. That makes a massive difference to how happy people are with your Power BI reporting. So this is an example from Dashboard in a Day, where they start with a higher level view and then you drill into maybe a more detailed view with some tables and stuff.
All right. I think it's similar to the questions that you're answering, that perhaps you could look at a summary view of all the questions you're trying to answer and would have either tabs or how.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, that would help people to either go back and forth or navigate through the pages to be able to know where to go for what.
Yeah, and you can use like a navigation bar style. I'll show you a public report that we designed where they use this kind of thing. So this is a Power BI report on the web that one of our customers, Australian Financial Complaints Authority, uses. And so these are all individual pages, and then they have this navigation here. Yeah, and so you're looking for something specific, and this is built for the public. The other thing about this is it's got a custom search bar. So when you look at, they've got this special search bar that they've created in the website to be able to find particular things, but that's not Power BI, right? Power BI starts here, underneath here, right? So this is the Power BI frame in underneath, and like that's just a good way to kind of have your navigation bar on the left and then your data on the right with different views. And so you can see they use this at a glance idea. So this is the overall roll up, and then each individual area that they're trying to report on. So that's kind of a nice way to present the data.
Yeah, this is a nice way to present. Wow, all this was done in Power BI.
Yeah, so this is JavaScript at the top. So this is web, and then this is Power BI down here in here. Yeah, so yeah, it's a good one.
Well, what was the page size used there? Because I can see a scroll.
Yeah. So this is a page. It's a custom page size that is this wide. So it's square, but it's long. And so I think in Power BI, I can't remember exactly which page size we used, but you go to custom, and then you would make the height maybe 1280. So you get more page to play with, and you maybe make the width less. So it's that kind of thing where you've made a page smaller but longer.
I see. Probably, what is your take on the use of tooltips also? Like the custom
Again,
tooltip?
that's a information relevance thing. I think tooltips, you have to be a little bit careful because of how if you're using a custom tooltip page, they're pretty processing heavy. If you've got a big DAX query behind that, it's going to run that DAX query every time you mouse over, every single, and so you have to be careful about performance. They can be good for popping up information that's relevant, so without having to click or do anything. So I quite like them. I quite like the standard tooltips as well, but tooltips are a really great way to present information when people need it. You know, so here you might want to add extra pieces in here to this tooltip to provide some extra information about, you know, what happened in that week. And so if you've got another page, maybe you would design a custom tooltip to show what happens in that week. And yeah, I know Alice and Christian and those guys do a great job of using, you know, public those tooltip pages to do that kind of stuff. And so yeah, I quite like a tooltip page, but it is a performance consideration. You need to be very careful about performance.
I recently watched a trick where someone used, I think, a bookmark to work like a tooltip, because you know the tooltip, the challenge is that you cannot play with the data if you want to click on it. It's just for viewing purposes.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
I think the person used a bookmark to be able to display the drill through, get more information on something, and be able to drill and slice and dice. So it's a great trick.
Yeah, there's so many nifty little tricks you can do with you know, presenting the information the way that you need it. And it really boils down to like what's important information when I'm looking here, so at first glance, and then what do I need to be able to give how can I present information that is relevant when they mouse over and then when they click. And so you've got quite a few options in the Power BI world to be able to do that. Okay, back to normal. Yeah, I think that's, I mean, so for people that are looking for more information about this, there's a lot of great books and YouTube videos and things like that around. I think that probably the best books in this space are, there's Stephen Few. So he has written Signal and Information Dashboard Design. These are two really great books for people that are interested in this area. As I mentioned, there's Tuft. So he's great. So these books, Envisioning Information, Visual Display of Quantitative Information, Beautiful Evidence, Visual Explanations. These are great books to get and learn. I've got those books just down there, actually. I've also got Stephen Few's book, and then there's Netflix. Look, this one. I'll just stop sharing my screen. Storytelling with data. This one. This is a great book as well, about telling data stories and learning all of the different techniques. Because I mean, there's a lot of people have been thinking about this for a long time, and so there's lots of great information for people who are interested in building more compelling sort of visual experiences for people, and thinking about those things. So good weekend reading.
Wow. That's a lot of reading, but it's good information to help you in your career if you want to actually build compelling dashboards for. I think my real takeout here is the fact that you should always think about the user and what you're trying to solve. At the end of the day, with all these nice things that you're trying to add, is whether you're solving the user's problems with the right insight, as well as, like you said, the context is very important, because if you are building for customer service help centers, they do not need to navigate so much to get details to be able to answer probably questions to the customer. So you need to be direct with things like that.
Correct.
Executives may not have too much time also on their hands, and you need to make sure that you consider all that. And if it's a multi-report to be used by different people, you could always try and give, like what you just showed us, a summary with clicks for various questions and various people who would want details. And you said one particular thing that the real test is that somebody could ask you, can your dashboard answer this question? And the number of clicks that would you do have to tell us whether you built a good dashboard to answer the problems that the end user may be looking at. So I think also too, you've been so helpful. This is great insights. You can always visit Greg Nash pages on LinkedIn and YouTube also to get more details on what he's doing. He's a great guy. I've been following for a while. So nice, Greg, and I appreciate the time that you spent with us, and we are very grateful. So I'll definitely have another interview with Greg. He's an all-round guy, so watch out for part 2 of this interview, and have a great weekend. Try and learn more. It's always good to learn. Greg, thank you so much, and I'll catch you some other time. So subscribe to my channel if you want more on Power BI. It's bye for now.